back again, everyone. I'm the other co-organizer, and I'd like to set up the second panel, which we titled Speculative Practices. This morning we got quite a lot of mileage out of this train metaphor. Should we accelerate? Should we pull the brakes? Jump off? I'm also quite sympathetic to the suggestion that maybe we should try to get out of this metaphorical space, as Mackenzie put it. So are there ways of thinking futurity in ways other than this linear future with all its theological and teleological traits? This is also why Eric and I, for instance, are interested in speculative fiction, science fiction. If you read Ursula Le Guin novels, for instance, they are not sort of plots, narratives that delineate a linear future, but they actually present different ways of organizing life, different forms of life, even a planet on which there is no, a planet that doesn't have two genders, for instance, which allow us to think differently, not perhaps think of an autre monde, but of an autre monde, but of a monde autre, right? Not this other world that we posit, but a different world that we can actually try to organize in this contested present that precisely because it is contested, because rifts keep appearing, produces different forms of futurity. Or does it? Because of course one problem or one question is whether or not we are de facto on this accelerating train on, and sort of the train is not just a metaphor, but it is actually this accelerated linearity of our history. And as Marina Vishmidt put it in the abstract of her talk, Accumulating Futures, from bioengineering to biomimicry, we seem to have become hostage to a dystopian view of the future as disaster management, resigned to the impossibility of any deviation from the destructive tendencies of the present. So indeed deviation, which you could also interpret in terms of this railway metaphor, of course. Are there any points where one can deviate? What are the possible deviations and the possible futurities that would be something else, something other than mere disaster management? And we use this term speculation or the adjective speculative in this panel's title because, of course, as you know, as with acceleration, speculation has been a hot theoretical commodity in recent years, and a rather unproductive, I would say, dichotomy has been posited between critical thought on the one hand and speculation, speculative thought on the other hand. And the left, for instance, is presented as always being invested in the present to immanent critique, trying to work their way through the contradictions of the present historically, and then therefore remaining trapped within a certain historical horizon and being unable to really think from the future, which certain speculative thinkers keep repeating, that actually the future happens before the present and we need to think, to theorize from the future. But this future, of course, then also is posited as basically a kind of outcome of exacerbated and accelerated developments in technoscience in particular, leaving away, let's say, the war machine aspect of capitalism. So, one can well argue that this speculative fiction, if you will, this speculative theory fiction of the future is not actually that dissimilar from the more dystopian, glum forebodings and forecastings of the future as permanent disaster management. You could say that it is a kind of whitewashed version of that, if I can put it in those terms. Okay, I won't go through sort of the various genealogies of this whole notion of speculation. We're running slightly late, and we want to make sure that we have enough time for discussion, so I'll skip this sort of historical genealogy that I planned. and I'll introduce our speakers, Marina, Vishmidt, and Diedrich Diederichsen. Marina teaches at Goldsmiths and at Dye here, well, today here in Eindhoven, and has written extensively on issues of art in relation to value and labor, in relation to financialization as well. And of course, when we say speculation, one form of speculation that we will easily think of is financial speculation, which Stephen Shaviro has termed closed speculation. So speculation that is goal-oriented and that actually is about perpetuating a certain present into the foreordained future, the future of disaster management. But of course there's also other forms of speculation, indeed more theoretical speculation, whether or not they brand themselves as such. And this we could term open speculation in Stephen Shaviro's terms. So thought, theory as something that should not be about, let's say, perpetuating a certain present, but it should precisely be about opening possibilities, potentialities, and futures. And Marina will discuss or will present us with certain theoretical speculations in relation to examples of some works, some artistic projects, some examples of future casting from the sphere of art, but also from beyond the sphere of art. So their art, in turn, visual art, takes up, let's say, the project of speculative fiction. And this, I think, connects Marina's talk to Diedrich Diederichsen's presentation, which is titled "A Dreamer as a Producer." Diedrich Diederichsen is a professor at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and has written extensively about pop music, underground and avant-garde culture. And in his talk he will ask the question, what are the technical media of the dream? Who is the person who cuts and edits, who directs and who invests in the technology, discussing examples ranging from Delmore Schwartz and the Dream Syndicate to Alan Vega and Suicide, and Teardrop Explodes. And yeah, here again we have the project of art as a speculative endeavor in perhaps the financial sense, but hopefully also in a different sense. And the floor actually is now first Diedrich. Diedrich?
Thank you. Yeah, I do. I will return to this kind of also slightly romantic old category of thinking of the future, the dream, in 10 little chapterettes of a talk that is called "The Dreamer as Producer," in brackets, of passivity. First, a dreamer always wants more. When we got informed about the double theme of this day, or these days, of becoming more and of the idea to talk about the future in a way that is neither just cultural pessimist or nor just purely technological, I had to think, when was the last time that somebody invested in the future outside of these parameters that I was not connected with, but exposed to. And I, of course, remembered my youth, and there it was the writings of Ernst Bloch, who was the critical thinker or the critical theorist that everybody liked, who wanted to believe in the future and who wanted to believe that the organization of the future, the communist future, would not be some kind of dreadful party organization work, but something that would have to do with dreams and fantasies. And his favorite categories were the latency and the tendency, which were like connected to the dream. The dream was always about latencies and tendencies. And the title of the introduction to the second part of his book, The Principle of Hope, is a dreamer always wants more. One of his always very solemn and super serious sentences, which were so attractive to the so-called undogmatic left of my own views, and which are so extremely far away today in their lack of humor and their universalist distance to, on one hand, the ironic tone, and to the other, to the identity political one of our days. Bloch, although much less quoted today and in use than fellow critical theorists like Adorno, Benjamin, Horkheimer, Marcuse, is, if you go deeper and pinch people, still the point of reference in many discourses when it comes to talk about utopian thinking on the left.
I always had difficulties with his priest-like appearance, his priest-like performance, but when it comes to the future, you always run into a lot of religious dignitaries. I decided to run away from him with the prey of his favorite theme, the dream, which Bloch famously did not regard as an idea or a model of illusion, but as an utopian force. So, placing himself in that way in the tradition of thinking of the dream as clairvoyance instead of illusion, which is, I think, basic alternative to the disregard of the dream. My main difference will be that I will not look at dreams in their function to produce new content, but in the way how they function. And I think that is their form of production. And this is something that resonates, I think, with a dreamer always wants more. This is a revolutionary form and not a content. 2. When I dream about you. When I dream about you is an old song by Julian Cope, written for and performed by his old Liverpool new wave band, the Teardrop Explodes. I like the categorical sound of it. I like to hear his self-confident, though poetic voice saying this, as if he's saying it is a necessary condition of dreaming that one is dreaming about you. Not because you're in love with you, or you're oppressed by you, or you have run into you this day, but because it's a necessary condition of dreaming is that there is a you involved, and that is not what the song continues to say, but that's what I like about it. As we all know, the material of any dream has been selected by us or something that is called by some people subconscious or unconscious mind, in order to come to terms with something we experienced recently or a long time ago, or both, to work it through. And I'm not so interested in this psychological maintenance theory of the function of the dream, but rather about its mediated construction. When I dream, I am a recipient. And I can only maintain my dreaming state as long as I do not know or acknowledge that the dream is coming from me, that I'm my own recipient. There are 3 framing narratives for that. One is that the dream is misleading. It's something like a machine that is programmed by an evil character, a company, or another trying to educate me, entertain me, manipulate me, or do something else with me using illusions. The second option is the dream is relevant and real. I experience this as something that is really happening, which is of course the condition for certain effects like horror or sexual arousal, the stuff nightmares and wet dreams are made of, or eerie encounters. In this case, the dream is produced by your fate, your truth, what you're really about, your biography. This is the Freud/existentialist version. The third option that I'm interested here is the dream is made by you, as in Julian Cope's song. This you is always a specific other, as a mask of, also guaranteeing the unpredictability of the dream. You speak to yourself, but since this is breaking the illusion of the wholeness of the dream world, you have to turn the dream into something that is shown to you, explained to you, given to you, occupying you in a dialogue by some kind of virtual leading Dante. You need the social construction of the other, the friend, the lover, to be able to think, to conceive. You need to be in a situation in which someone else is telling you something. The dream, in this sense, is an initiation in the dialogic nature of thinking in general, of negotiating as a necessary condition for thinking. That you're not thinking solipsistically, you're thinking in a conversation with you. You has to come up with some interesting spectacle in order to make you thinking, to drive you thinking. And one can even read this as a political moral. Your thinking flows much better when you're thinking with others, empathic, for example. 3, I was dreamt. Part of the negotiation is to accept passivity as activity. In older German, one was not saying ich träumte, I dreamt, but mir träumte. It was dreamt to me. In a way, I'm arguing here that the dream is nothing but the formula, the basic cultural or anthropological genre by which the desire to be a recipient is articulated. A passive recipient which can be surprised, shocked, pleased, as if he or she is not the producer and still simultaneously is the very producer of all the conditions of the pleasant passivity. The dream is the purest form of our wish that something happens to us. Something is told us, but not by us, and then again by us. When we're awake, we still want the same thing, but now we do not believe in paradoxes any longer. We now need performers, producers, writers, and above all, media, to believe that the dream was not produced by ourselves, but by some otherness, specialists, witnesses, virtuosity, reality, and so on. 4, the aesthetics of dreaming. When Glauber Rocha, the Brazilian filmmaker, wrote his manifesto 1971 for an aesthetic of dreaming, he was responding to his own previous manifesto for an aesthetics of hunger from 1965. In the so-called third world, so Rocha's claim, there's not only hunger and poverty, there's also magic and rituals. But both, according to Glauber Rocha, is connected. Defining those magic and ritual-based cultures specific to Brazil as Afro-Indian, Rocha claims a connection between poverty, the culture of the African diaspora, and indigenous cultures. He does not go into details in explaining this connection, but one could argue indeed that all three, of course partly overlapping cultural perspectives in Brazil, have a commonality, and this is a commonality with the dream, if you see it first and foremost as a transformative practice. First, the transformative nature of magic, thinking in all those ideas of the world in which there are souls and ghosts involved, so that you can have a dialogue with the forces of nature and influence them on a basis from soul to soul, involve a similar active passivity as the construction of dreams. Many rituals have practical purposes, but priest or shaman has to perform, the priest or the shaman has to perform to be a receiver, a recipient. A lot of magic and a lot of religion is based on the performance of an exposed passivity, not as activity. Second, the urgency of extreme violent oppression and negation of yourself, the lack and loss of tools and instruments, which leaves you with no other way out but to trust the immediacy of your wish, your immaterial forces, because they're only ones that you are left with. But this is similar, but a different meaning of dream, closer to prayer than to transformative rituals, for example, and the performance of passivity. Thirdly, hunger and extreme poverty leave you with an irreal relation to the world, since your very basis in the reproduction of your physical ability, your bodily functions, is in danger. You are left with your dreams. Glauber Rocha combines these three ideas of dreaming and identifies them with a construction of core of non-Western cultural resistance that his films are meant to talk about. Especially the last one, Idade da Terra, this where he returns to this manifesto. 5. In dreams begin responsibilities. Delmore Schwartz was a writer of poetry and short prose within the circle of the so-called New York intellectuals around people like Irving Howe. In his best-known short story, In Dreams Begin Responsibilities, the protagonist dreams that he's sitting in a movie theater in which a film is screened showing his father proposing to his mother. There are several dreams in the dream, within the dream, like the cinema of course, but also the father is planning the proposal in a reverie which works completely different from the real course of actions when he's finally doing it. Then the spectator, storyteller, protagonist jumps up in the cinema, screaming towards the screen, "Don't do it! It's not too late to change your minds, both of you, nothing good will come out of it. Only remorse, hatred, scandal, and 2 children whose characters are monstrous." Unquote. So we learn that this dream is some kind of Oedipal time machine in order to commit suicide. This is like, it's a time travel, you prevent your parents from even getting together in order to not to live. But more important is the setting. There are 2 people constantly commenting the dream and the actions of the dreamer. An elderly woman sitting next to him, comforting him when he's in pain, and an usher who asks him to behave better, threatening to throw him out and explaining to him that he's not allowed to behave like this. You can't act like this even if other people aren't around. The dream has here a clearly exchangeable private narrative, the standard, so to say, the Oedipal standard narrative, always about the subject. But the subject needs it to discuss as if it was forced upon him like a finished movie. Only then can he become active and, if you wish, subjective. The subjectivity which the dream constructs is a limited subjectivity which is only able to take shape at all when it is placed next to an overwhelming passivity. Cinema often has been compared to dreams, and there are psychologists who think that basically dreaming was a completely different thing before cinema existed, and others who think that there were no such thing as dreams before cinema, but something completely different. Anyway, but here it's important, I think, that the cinema, which is famously a dispositive, is present, so that we can think of the dream being a dispositive too. Chapter 6, no reproduction, no storage, dream music. The dream is a weapon of the poor, or the last resort. This is not the only thing it has in common with music, famously. Producing music can be conceived as a dreamlike production as well. If you walk through the forest, all by yourself, that's the only place in the world where you walk all by yourself, and whistle an improvised song or an improvised tune all for yourself, protecting you or just making you happy, you are also enjoying a passivation and being a recipient, a listener position, which you have on the other hand actively created. Different from dancing with yourself or balancing on a wall or other playful activities you might engage in when you're on your own, the passive reception is as important in this case as the active production. And all of what you produce when you're producing this little tune is something that you get by listening. Whereas when you're dancing with yourself alone, you're not getting how you look dancing. You only get how it feels to produce the movement, but you're not seeing you. So, but in the music example, you're getting exactly what you're producing, at least on a superficial level. This self-communication functions just like a dream in that very sense. It is without media, and just like a dream, it disappears after it has happened. It cannot be reproduced or stored, and thus it cannot be turned into a commodity. It cannot even generate value. It cannot even be exchanged as a natural product. It's just gone after it has been produced. Maybe it can generate a skill, and that skill can be turned into labor force. But this immediacy and accessibility that cannot be commodified and marketed tempted producers of art to ask if it is possible to use the dream as the model of an utopian format of art production. One of the goals of the musicians group around Lamont Young, Marian Cecilia, Tony Conrad, John Cale, and Agnes McLeese, which was active between 1963 and 65 under different names, was to play continuous drones in such a way that the produced music would be inside and outside their bodies at the same time. The sound would not leave the body and at the same time be around them. They would be listeners and producers with their violins, violas, and voices simultaneously. When I said different names, this is where the problems with this particular utopia started. There are several anecdotes in circulation, and most of them can be found in Brandon Joseph's book on Tony Conrad, Beyond the Dream Syndicate. But one anecdote that I have once heard in a TV biography that Victor Bockris had produced on John Cale has become somehow apocryphal. I cannot find it again. In his memory, told by John Cale to Bockris, he and Lamont Young spent time in a bar while the jukebox plays All I Ever Do Is Dream by the Everly Brothers. And Cale adds that for him this was clear, that this, for both of them it was clear that this is a song about masturbation. And they decide, after hearing that and liking it, they decide that the music they are playing should be called dream music. Later there's a conflict between Conrad and Cale on one side and Young and Cecilia on the other, partly referring to the bizarre question, who is the composer when 5 people play a drone for 7 hours? The one who proposed the interval they were playing, or the whole collective who was not only playing it but also responsible for the decision to do such things at all? And part of this conflict was also the name of the ensemble. The Young Cecilia fraction called it the Theatre of Eternal Music, and Conrad and Cale called it the Dream Syndicate, or they just spoke about dream music. So that's a power of positions there, the dream and the theatre. 7. Feminine Men, the New Mutants. This dream music is maybe the first, at least an early example of someone defining the dream not by its content or by the fact that human brains were occupied with real content, lived and experienced as if they were real, like most other dream theories. But this definition was built only along the fact that producer and recipient were identical. But the practice indeed went a step further, objectifying this experience qua collectively produced music. There are similar stories, for example, in Ben Radcliffe's biography of John Coltrane, of the unity of performer and recipient from the early days of free jazz, when it was all about producing some kind of collective vibration, which also became some kind of collective territory, inhabited by producers as recipients. In his seminal essay, The New Mutants, first published in Partisan Review in 1965, Leslie Fiedler describes an American youth not yet called hippies or radicals, but he describes them already as feminized, his words, and pessimistic and beyond conventional gender stereotypes. He doesn't say gender stereotypes, he says something else, but anyway. One of his examples is the case of the so-called Beatnik Cafe in Venice Beach in California that is supposed to be closed by the local authorities due to the behavior of its clientele. When a lady living in the neighborhood is appearing as a witness in court, testifying the odd acts of the customers of that cafe, she says that they're not doing anything aggressively. That is terrifying her. Not what they're doing aggressively or what they're doing at all is terrifying her, but that they are just there and let themselves be watched. And just standing there and doing nothing and attracting gazes. That is so disgusting about them that they should go away. For Fiedler, this passivity is a combination of the cool, which he attributes to what he calls Negro culture, and the feminine to what he attributes to, quote, the wish to be looked at, to be beautiful, and to be loved, unquote. Chapter 8. Forever, forever. In this historical moment, 1965, in the development of the dream somewhere between a political metaphor for the utopian and its utopian function as a non-mediated, self-induced, passive enjoyment, or any passive enjoyment and reception, Lou Reed, who was actually a student of Delmore Schwartz, writes the lines, "I'm tired, I'm weary, I could sleep for 1,000 years, 1,000 dreams that would not wake me," in his song Venus in Furs, based on the novel of the same title by Leopold von Sacher-Masoch, patron saint of masochism. It is the masochistic slave Severin who dreams that dream that Lou Reed is talking about. The 1,000 years in the song refer to another important aspect, which is the third cornerstone of the mediumless medium of the dream, that it is endless. Ernst Bloch's dreamer from the beginning, that always wants more, not just wants to accumulate more and more objects. The dreamer's active passivity is not the consumer's active passivity. He or she wants it longer. He or she doesn't want it to stop. As Alan Vega used to sing in Dream Baby Dream, forever, forever, or for that matter, 1,000 years. The driving force of the dream is that it should not end. It is not about wanting something specific. It is not about gratification or satisfaction. The already mentioned examples of nightmares and wet dreams are just compromised rationalizations of the wish for endlessness. Both sexual satisfaction or the threat of a horrible nightmare shift the dream logic from the form of enjoyment to a specific content of reception. This is of course not completely irrelevant, but secondary. The endlessness corresponds with the only seemingly paradox of the deeply social character of the dream procedure. When I dream about you. The dream is a format which turns your necessary internal thought production into an event, a show, and a dialogue. It tests and extends the solipsism by masquerading it as a conversation and experience with others. It is an exercise in social practice as enjoyment, but the social is governed by rules and laws. It is constructed by a symbolic order and its normativity. The dream is thus permanently endangered. The producer of the dream is often very good at invoking and presenting people and landscapes and situations and adventures, but he or she is not good at representing the invisible and absent rules and laws that constitute the worldliness of the dream, not the least by a degree of contingency. Whenever the dream's producer has to make decisions about how something continues, they often fail. They just repeat or slow down. They know people and things, contents, but they don't know the dream logic by which they function, and so they run out of occasions for surprise, for the necessary interruptions and shifts of reality. So when they're not slowing down or looping, they change the subject until the dream ends because the dreamer is getting bored as a recipient. It's becoming a consumer. What is starting in the 1960s, or of course in surrealism earlier, when artists were trying to understand the dream logic and use it for the arts, or more specific, transforming subject-oriented composer-based art into a collective dream work, has in the meantime generated countless genres that continue to explore various modes of being inside and outside the sound at the same time, as Tony Conrad described it. These genres are called, for example, ambient, or dark ambient, or noise. And there are many other names for musical formats that operate in the dream logic inspired models that were invented in those days, at least, or reinvented probably, not invented. It is just one of those developments of which there are so many in which a minoritarian specific practice is multiplied and refined over the years. Or is there a connection with other practices of directness, of evasion, of mediation, which have predecessors in the 1960s and are currently enjoying a widespread boom and or return, like so many forms of performance art or also shamanism. Chapter 9, another summer of shamanism versus transformative aesthetics. From the pavilion of the shamans, that's a name that I didn't give it, that's the official name in the current Venice Biennial, to the spectacularly uncritical Joseph Beuys biopic, which is currently a success in German cinemas and shown in essence as part of the documenta. From the artworks by several documenta artists, the shaman is back, and it seems to combine the two earlier retro developments, dream logic and performance art, of course always with a taste of Eurocentrist Orientalism, and sometimes also anti-Eurocentrism. But if I say retro, I'm not, at least not just by using this word, polemical. Sometimes the return of things is not just a reflection of other failures and sentimental nostalgia, but the necessary return of an unfinished process. Here, the discovery and analysis of the dream logic between dream music in the early 60s and the Western ethno-boom in the mid-70s, including categories like individual mythologies, which Harald Seemann coined in the early 70s, which became a successful notion in art debates and exhibition propaganda until the late 70s. Of course, there was just as much regression and visual mythological thinking involved. But in order to become more specific, maybe Glauber-Rocha's identification of aesthetics of poverty with indigenous and Afro-Brazilian aesthetics was not such wishful thinking in the spirit of the patchwork of minorities, as Lyotard used to say, but had a serious materialistic point. For the so-called aesthetics of the poor, if there is such a thing, could not be described on the basis of certain belief systems or belief content, but as techniques and strategies when dealing with producing ideas and practices of transformation and change. Second, the survival and success of certain forms of his examples, for example, candomblé, does not have to be attributed to a very specific tradition and their contents alone in a substantialist way, but can be described as successful or relatively successful strategy, which in the course of time has accumulated narrative content and substance. But we should not overestimate any narrative theological content over the liturgical practice. Candomblé and its relatives on both sides of the Black Atlantic has been proven successful, and here Rocha's claim of an Afro-Indian tradition sounds less fantastic and fictitious, becomes successful regardless of the so-called background of those who practice it, but of course with regard to the general conditions of life and basically the political purpose. Chapter 10, Media Specificity of Non-Media, Passivism and Activism. My point is not to reify certain non-Western techniques, but I would like to generalize commonalities of transformative aesthetics with dream logic aesthetics by not finding them in the substance of traditions and local necessities alone, but rather in something that is or was accepted a necessary condition of successful artworks also in the very West. When we agree that the dream logic is a formula or a paradigm for a form of directness in an artistic communication without technical media or recording, a practice that already exists in all kinds of solipsistic practice in front of the mirror, it is this very absence of a medium that should become the center of a media-specific reflexivity. Media specificity without medium. So what would be at stake following this proposal is twofold. On one side, it could and should be applied to the millions of activity in the art world which try to transgress the art institutions, the symbolic walls of the white cube, and other obstacles to direct social impact. I detect in most of these activities a kind of magic and often also simplistic idea of directness. But these type of artworks are on the rise. They are somehow representing the state of affairs in contemporary art. Whatever one thinks about the normativity of calling something the state of affairs. And cannot be stopped, neither in visual art proper, nor in theater, performance, media performance, lecture performance, and so on. Here the important starting point would be to localize the dream logic of directness within the framework of general political economic conditions and their dream logic and its application for daily life. For instance, in the value form, which can be called a dream, or the personal computer, which can be described as something based on the dispositive of dream logic. It's an active passivity. On the other side, this could and should be applied to the question of Western art versus non-Western art, the deconstruction of the naturalness of museum-based art. This does not necessarily mean that we come to the conclusion we seem to come to now, that directness is better in times of political urgency, or just in general better than detached autonomous art reception, but that just all practices with different ideas on the scale between direct action and reflexive detachment are up for evaluation, and not on the basis of any preconditions like a Eurocentric tradition and or bias, but also not on the grounds of pure moralistic urgency claims. The dream logic is forbidding to identify directness with simplistic ideas of agency, activity, and subjectivity. Its main advantage is the combination of directness and passivity. Its combination of self-centric, amoral, pleasure-oriented, inwards directness towards yourself, and practices in which this is done collectively and always in need of you and the other in such diverse areas, from experimental music to also, unfortunately, often rather dreadful esoteric therapeutic practices and nostalgia for the artist as a German shaman. But in the future, maybe in a reflexive use of all those transformative aesthetic formats, which today, more often than not, only serve to occupy and activate consumers of art and other products, passivism and dream logic might bring help to educate kind of blind activism with historical knowledge about passivism, about the knowledge of letting things happen. Thank you for your attention.
So, as Sven already delivered a few spoilers on my talk, I guess I can skip the abstract and go straight to the beginning. So, yeah, accumulating futures. And thanks, first I should say thanks for inviting me, Sven and Eric, and for organizing everything here at the Van Abbe and the DAO. It's a real honor to be in an event with you guys. So there's a lot of contemporary social and political phenomena which can be read, and in fact are being read, as indicators of a fear of the future. Much liberal or even left liberal media analysis of the traction of right-wing populist tendencies in the last 18 months or so, not to mention the more ideologically crude analyses of the left populism of the Greek referendum in 2015, or the political eruptions of the Indignados, Sanders, or Corbyn, for example, have been offering a diagnosis of the bewildered masses longing for return to the safe and simple, or, as the traditional manipulators of popular paranoia, the UK Tory party has it at the moment, strong and stable, time of yesteryear, when things in general seem to be improving rather than being on a downward spiral. The elites win when their risky, incompetent, and power-hoarding political maneuvers sow chaos, which then the elites step forward to resolve, with more of the same, the traditional mafia strategy. In this light, fear of the future is seen to breed conservatism, especially when the future looks like the present with extra war zone filter. This is a strategy which seems to succeed with confused and disempowered groups seeking protection, or, as we know from historical and current experience, those who are currently relatively empowered but feel precarious, their systemic advantage threatened by others, migrants, minorities, elites, supranational organizations. And often in a context where politics operates in a vacuum comprised of a fossilized neoliberal common sense on the one hand, and the absence of realistic seeming alternatives, realistic in terms of that common sense, naturally, on the other. In these terms, the fear of the future is also fear of the present slipping away, of losing what one has. The phenomenon of populism thus presents itself, in the analysis I'm referring to, as primarily a desire centered on the future, either to stop the future or to find those culpable for stealing our future. This question of the ownership of the future seems quite key, both here and to the next future-oriented discourse that I'll touch on. So at the same time, there are elements in this spectrum of populism, such as neo-reaction, or more famously, the white nationalist and misogynist currents known as the alt-right, which do have a kind of vision of the future, ones which are most influentially articulated in cyber-libertarian Silicon Valley terms, which sometimes can filter vile modernist dogmas such as racism and eugenics beyond the semi-opaque screen of engineering discourse. There's no better demonstration than these phenomena that hyper-capitalism can only ever be hyper-racism, as in the social media grandstanding of Nick Land, etc., which play the classic fascist game of provocation and disidentification. Cyber-libertarian, Ayn Randian, and transhumanist discourses, not that all transhumanist discourses are determined in that way, land objectively on the conservative spectrum, as surely as Peter Thiel has landed in the Trumpian White House inner circle. These are visions of the future which located both as an extension of present trends, like quantification and networking of everything, and a nostalgia for bygone times, from colonial modernity to Dungeons and Dragons feudalism, which will provide the service infrastructure for this meritocratic vista. It can be suggested that such orientations are marked by a purely formal, ideological notion of society that dominates the social bases of engineering, programming, and the technosciences. Notice I say dominates, not defines. So the left version of this, which is not left at all, given its confinement by similar libertarian and solutionist dogmas, is often set out in terms of the resilient category, resilience. As with figures like the what Weiss calls global resilience guru Vinay Gupta, a software engineer and planner who often works for the US government, prototyping tent cities for the majority of near-future humanity, and is prone to saying things like, quote, "Fixing problems by changing the technology base and the buying options available to the public seems to be a fairly painless way to move us forwards, but political change on all these issues is basically a dead end." End quote. And quote, "What if the objective isn't to level out the game between winners and losers, but to make life as good as possible for the losers?" End quote. There's also phenomena like the startup NGO Edge Riders and the Unmonastery. Here we have a consensus on the future as disaster management. The question is how the disaster will be distributed. Resilience here is another byword for getting used to the fact that things will be much worse, and any collective attempt to improve them will make them outright nightmarish. So perhaps technology is our last hope to make all of this somewhat bearable. This is basically present-day futurism in a nutshell. If you don't believe me, take a look at what is passing for future speculation in the upper echelons of the art institution, increasingly indistinguishable, it's true, from the State Department or from Mountain View. That's not it. So, definitely. Okay. Right, I'll just let that go for a while. These speculative futures are better called reactionist futures, with reactionist as a neologism capturing both the right-leaning political tendency and the fact that their imaginary is one of almost exclusively reacting to existing parameters and never proposing or even fictionalizing anything else. Orit Halpern has recently written incisively about the resilience worldview and its nihilist humanitarianism. She links the emergence of the resilience ideology and of financialization to the same cultural moment, one where it is acknowledged that there is no way to stop extraction and accumulation as a permanent dynamic of our social and organic life, but the system can be optimized to withstand the shocks that this dynamic keeps generating on a larger and larger scale. Thus, speculative futures understood in these terms are all about finding ways to make sure the present continues indefinitely. As she notes, quote, "Resilience has a peculiar logic. It is not about a future that is better, but rather about an ecology that can absorb constant shocks while maintaining its functionality and organization. It is a state of permanent management without ideas of progress, change, or improvement." End quote. Further, she observes that, quote, "There is a new sentiment emerging of positive affect for negative futures. These images are indoctrinated by what I want to label resilient hope, an emergent paradigm that links high-tech computational infrastructures of ubiquitous computing and smartness, data centers and finance, to the more concrete, extractive or exploitative economies of bodies, such as those in West Bengal or New York City. Combined together, resilience and technology create a form of preemptive infrastructural governance that naturalizes precarity, sacrifice, and violence as a necessary economic value, rather than as a politically derived option." End quote. The futurology of today looks like the embrace of uncertainty in the face of the all too immutable certainties of capitalist power and authoritarian political modes. This epistemic paradox of a hopeful openness to a future already pre-sealed and formatted by the present can also remind us of, as Sven already mentioned, Steven Shaviro's ideas of open and closed speculation, where the open form is speculative thought, which proceeds autonomously, and the closed form is speculative finance, which is goal-oriented and is thus trivial as a speculation, in speculative terms. One kind of speculation generates the social conditions that make it impossible to do the other kind of speculation, the socio-political speculation, triggering a feedback loop of fear and hope. Here we can return to the idea of time as resource of accumulation extracted from the present to reproduce it in the future. This is the basic structure of how financial instruments such as derivatives, options, and futures work. They extrapolate from the present and past to model the future on its premises. On the other hand, there could be a radical change, but it too has to be contained in the models, or it won't be a profitable option, as I think Mackenzie also noted. This accumulation and commodification of time depends upon it being envisioned as a form of abstract value, not unlike the pure and empty form of time discussed by Gilles Deleuze in Difference and Repetition, in the passages on Kant's concept of time as primary intuition. Or time as homogeneous continuum in which progress automatically unfolds, as in Walter Benjamin's theses on the philosophy of history. The loss of density, materiality, opacity that comes with participating in the shape of time, or bringing about rather lightweight, lack of proofreading in time. The loss of density, materiality, opacity that comes with participating in the shape, those qualities that can come with participating in determining the shape of time get lost. And what is brought about instead is a rather lightweight and abstract relation to something called the future, which is already a reified category. It is thus not surprising if this future is one of brand cycles for capital objectified or human, evoking the immaterial but seductive combination of global production chains and personalized control that is the gadget. Fetishism is being cut off from reality, chief among it labor, meaning reality becomes reproductive rather than speculative, as in making other futures seem possible and tangible. The omnipresence of the future as resilient present can be equated to being cut off from having any role in the future. Being cut off from having a role in the future is nothing more or less than being cut off from having a role in the present, i.e. from social and political power. In response to this predicament, the directive often comes that we need to recapture the future or invent it. On the other hand, perhaps a more effective response, which takes the fear of the future as a general affect and inverts it, is to see what it is about the present that is blocking the future. One way to block it, of course, is to generate futures aplenty, which are simply quantitative ones, that affirm the status quo as extension, and knowingly substitute quantitative for qualitative change. With the biggest fantasy of the future, takeover by artificial intelligence, is nothing if not a fantasy of reaching a qualitative tipping point by quantitative means. With this question of what it is about the present that blocks either the emergence of a future or a clear grasp of what a future is, I take my cue from an insightful short text by Evan Calder-Williams called Volcano, Waiting. The comma between volcano and waiting is important. Where he notes that rather than being led by critique to imagine the future, we need to find the limits of our imagination instead. So something like a Kantian anti-futurology. That the futures we can imagine are the futures that our blocked imaginations are capable of, and critique is similarly restrictive. Quote, "But the fact remains that the predominant social forms that work both on and through us are not just the ones that any substantively different future must undo. They are themselves also forms of structuring a mode of futurity, such that it remains endlessly entangled with and enthralled to a past that vanishes into present functionality and disorder alike. End quote. The obvious example the text provides here is racism. Another one is death, which engenders a time without rupture or possibility, as already noted earlier, but noted with greater length and sophistication in the work of Maurizio Lazzarato, who we heard in the first half. Or global warming and environmental degradation. These are all crushing residues of the past that operate in the present, not to say that they are not continuing to grow, not just linger in that present, and block the future. The future cannot be operationalized because of them. They block it absolutely. For this, we do have to come back to fear of the future. Who fears the future? Futurologists fear the future. Finance fears the future. Whoever accumulates the future is terrified of the times getting out of control as social antagonism. Fearing the future is fearing history. And in relation to that, of course, we can think about Marx's idea of capitalist social relations as prehistoric. So another subject of fear of the future is, as already noted, art. Art fears the future. So art as a holder of speculative, unknown, inchoate futures is no longer a space of speculative negativity, at least in this light, but affirmative speculation, trading on the subjectivities of self-optimization and quantification, unknown futures as market commodity, operating in the nexus between open and closed speculation. Also operating from the premise that art is a driver rather than a symptom, just like the myopic focus on the finance industry does. Also the usual regressive pairing of the mystified aura of authorship, originality, genius, with the highest degree of automation possible. This is classic capitalist culture industry, as everyone from its guarded endorsers such as Benjamin to its bleakest underminers such as Adorno and Horkheimer already recognized almost a century ago. Now I'm building up context for the few minutes of a film we're about to watch, which will make all this more tangible as well as smellable. So the question of just how futuristic this set of coordinates is.
Through algorithmic learning, ISCA fellows will instrumentalize a market that already operates as if regulated by computational logic. The analysis of art market metadata has proved beneficial primarily for collectors, many of whom do very little besides await returns from the derivatives market. At the core of the institutional
Got very crunchy. That's what the future is. Yep.
the supercomputer that analyzes and models the flow of art markets. For some time, market data has been the primary determinant in shaping matters of taste. It is a cybernetic system which has trained the heart and the mind. This requires a complex analysis of trends. Then, you add in Instagram data, and Instagram data is incredible because you're basically crowdsourcing opinion. The more the art market becomes gamified, the more adept the ISCA algorithm will be in generating a detailed production plan for art that can successfully enter the market flow. You see, this will be done within an acceptable margin of error, considering volatility and a penchant in the art market for anomalies. Mastering the market shouldn't take long since it does trend toward the formulaic and user-friendly. Artworks are eager to please. After setting up shop in the Breuer building, ISCA fellows and directors will function as subject matter experts, providing rating data to artificial neural networks. The networks are made up of software-based neurons, which communicate and alter their connection strengths to adapt and learn. The ISCA algorithm also encodes a chain of inferences made by contemporary art experts, financial analysts, and critical theorists. This deep learning machine factors the creative products of art history to help draw inferences about originality and influence. Art is a special asset class, a beautiful instrument, really, which provides very tangible incentives and returns on investment. And it is less risky than you'd think. Proper analytics and data management are the key. The myth that everything can be quantified is quite powerful. While services provided by Art Advisor and ArtRank all deliver predictive data, our computational model is focused on a different horizon. We aim to serve the interests of artists, not just collectors. Once the system is up and running, contemporary art products will be marketed and sold under the ISCA imprimatur. Like any other creative expression, algorithmic art requires interpretation, a human touch. Authorship and individuality are key factors for quantifying artistic value. Collectors expect it. So, just about all ISCA production will be outsourced. A crowd-working system will hire technicians marked by the highest reputational rankings. Painters, welders, but also coders and 3D designers. Luckily, there is a large labor pool to draw from. Art schools have turned vocational.
Okay, so elsewhere in the film, unfortunately can't show you the whole thing, but you can watch it on Vimeo. The voiceover track sums up the project, or the ostensible project that is being narrated here, by saying contemporary art is a multi-billion-dollar unregulated market with unclear criteria just waiting to be harnessed. And the ISCA, which stands for Institute of Southern Contemporary Art, algorithm is just the instrument to do it. It isn't a perfect deterministic model, but at ISCA we didn't get into the art game to just optimize for market performance. The goal of automating contemporary art is to become emancipated from it. So, the goal of automating contemporary art is to ultimately become emancipated from it. Just so, although totally differently, the future is about freeing from the present, about being freed from the present. The future thus appears as not so much a time or a state, rather a dynamic of separation. This enters into an intriguing, if misleading, relation with disruption, the originally tech, now generalized idiom of changing the world if the world is envisioned as a series of product cycles. Concluding again with Calder-Williams, quote, "Nothing clearly marks a passage into the future without undoing the forms that bind lives, materials, and systems, invariably punitive ways, to a mode of time designed around the continuity of the present. By future, we may well mean just that sensation of coming unstuck in and from the present." That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you. Indeed, if the future is about freeing, yourself from the present, about this dissociation, rather than about, any particular block of time that is yet to come, if it is this permanent movement of dissociation, of rupture, of disentanglement, I was wondering, Diedrich, whether you could say a bit more about the way that these various, let's say, form of dream aesthetics functioned before you got around to discussing contemporary artistic activism and this let's say, cult of immediacy. Your examples were mostly from basically the early to mid 60s to the late 70s, sort of spanning basically this era of utopian energy, but then also going through the let's say era of the end of the future, right, towards the late 70s. So I was wondering how sort of various forms of dream aesthetics and dream performance and activism function within that. I have the feeling that, you know, occasionally there's perhaps, or there has been a tendency starting in the 1990s to also to some extent fetishize you know, the 60s, because this did seem to be the last moment at which there were real, you know, revolutionary and utopian energies. So yeah, let's say this historical time frame within which, of course, you do actually differentiate, and you know, you don't just, let's say, use examples from Western Europe or from New York, but you also have Glaube Woche, for instance. So could you say something about sort of the privileging, perhaps, in developing your argument of this period, of this time frame, mid 60s to late 70s, and how we could indeed think also the multiplicity within that time frame, if we want to, let's say, go further than you know, creating a kind of nostalgic retro cult of this period in which, you know, dreams and utopian, a certain utopian imaginary still seem to be possible. So yeah, what is the, let's say, the actuality of the various projects, perhaps the one more than the other in the present?
Yeah, I think that the thinking about this core period that you identified in my examples normally refers to specific and in a content-oriented way to utopias. So it's, and I think this is a lot of the orientalizing or Eurocentrism in adopting dream logics had to do with fetishizing the specific objects that they found in dream-based practices, and not so much in looking at the logic. And this has also a lot to do, of course, with the fact that this kind of whole Bloch thinking of utopian thinking coming from dreams that are latent, and this whole application of a Freudian dream logic on a political unconscious that finally becomes conscious, and the Pasolini's quoting Marx, the dream of a thing, that all religions are just the dream of a thing that only has to become realized, but that's already in the religions. You already have more or less the utopian thinking. This is, of course, early Marx writing to Ruge, but Pasolini quoted it as a title of one of his books, so it's kind of the dream of a thing is kind of well distributed. So that I try to kind of defetishize that, but of course, whenever you mention an example, you re-fetishizing, or you have the tendency to re-fetishizing again, and also, of course, with that period, it's the one that I know better than others. So that's. I also think that probably the way Tony Conrad talks about the dream logic is one of the most consistent and examples. But I think you have it, of course, in earlier Western practices also, like, of course, écriture automatique tries something like that, and of course, I think you have it since the dream has been identified as a potential subversive force, and that has famously been done by psychoanalysis, but of course it has happened also earlier, it is of course some kind of cultural production that, because it cannot be stored and turned into a commodity, even since recording devices are around, even then it's still not possible. You can only measure the brain activities, which people do a lot, and so it remains to be a kind of uncomfortable part of the totally controlled.
Right.
Yeah, but I think it would be it is misdirected to identify this uncontrolled part with an uncontrolled part of individuality. And find your specific story with your parents there as the kind of subversive force. That's precisely not the interesting point.
Yeah. No, exactly. So the social nature of dream work, in a sense. Yeah, and of course we are very much interested also in fleshing out genealogies and let's say finding antecedents. But I was wondering indeed if, when we got to the present, your sort of take on, let's say, a certain contemporary culture of immediacy, right? And of course with écriture automatique, we have maybe the classical example of an immediate medium in which the writer supposedly just channels something. I was wondering whether you could also discuss, perhaps briefly, some other specific contemporary practices that you would consider to be contemporary, instantiations, iterations of this kind of Traumarbeit, of this kind of dream work.
Yeah, I mean, there's a danger I do that in a negative way, because I think this overwhelming return to direct activities called activism in art, not activism in general, of course, is often based on a kind of liberative. Can you say that? Liberatory act of getting rid of some kind of constraint, some kind of prison house. And I think this is, it is often so absorbed by this self-understanding as escaping from some kind of prison house, the prison house of autonomy or whatever, that it is not thinking of its own practice as one that has a mediatic side, be it a non-medium. And that's why I'm calling for a kind of media specificity of the non-medium, because that is once you broke out of the prison, you could finally get to the thing itself, to the content without any housing of a form, and so that forbids to many activists to think of that. And my proposal is kind of twofold. The one is thinking of the medium of non-medium. The other is to think of the benefits of passivism in activism, the benefit of letting things happen instead of making things, and of posing like the people now, unfortunately, another example from the 60s, but the posers in the Venice Beach Cafe that became criminals because they were not doing something.
Yeah. Well, if on the other hand we look at certain speculative or meta speculative practices, such as the piece that Marina has shown, of course there we do have this awareness of mediality, and there's certainly not this striving for immediacy. There is a heightened awareness of, let's say, the algorithmic mediality and mediacy and Mittelbarkeit and medialität of contemporary art. Art as an asset class, with the server center being sort of the material base of the medium in question. But then, of course, perhaps also the ultimate medium, let's say, is time, right? Or it is a certain management of time and a mining of time for value. Let's see. Marina, could you perhaps briefly, before we open it up to the audience, say something more specifically also about to what extent you think that the examples you've shown, or one of the examples you've shown, is affecting a kind of critique of, let's say, closed speculation and the financialization of art, the transformation of art in into speculative capital. I mean, are you using these as forms of immanent critique that would somehow also allow us to engage in a different mode of speculation, or is the critique more in your, let's say, in your use of the pieces?
I mean, it's kind of tricky, because I think with immanent critique we also have to assume that part of the critical strength derives from the implication to an extent. Not, I wouldn't say complicity, but implication. So the critique is related to the symptomaticity of the phenomenon in a sense. And the critique also, I guess, is the way there's a relation to that symptom at the level of enactment, performance, concept. So I would say perhaps that project website that I showed first, I don't know whether it in itself can be said to be a form of immanent critique. I don't think so. I don't know if the people who are involved with it maybe see themselves as engaged in such projects. Obviously it's a big platform rather than a project. But in a sense it's purely illustrative, right? This film obviously perhaps does see itself as a critique in some sense, but I think you need to dig into what it's a critique of necessarily. I think it's quite complex, because I think it also identifies with some of its themes, right, in a lot of ways. And I guess perhaps also this idea of immanence relates to medium, like the medium of critique, which I guess is what you were pointing to as well. And what the medium is here is the medium data, is the medium the institution of art. It seems to be both. The media is not so much the expression or the articulation, because it's not about itself being a film. It's
right.
more about its constitution.
Well, in this film, which is actually by Erika Love and
Joao Exruto.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This
but
film
their group name is
yeah.
Institute for Southern Contemporary.
Right. Yeah. But it also seemed to indeed put us as viewers in this position of passivity as activity, and especially with the service center, there is this oniric, unreal quality to the imagery, and the voice-over, which is quite soothing and very rhetorical, of course, also seems to be a kind of voice that speaks to us in this state of heightened, ludic and lucid awareness, right? That we might associate with dream production.
Can I just say one thing? But I think it's maybe an example of a particular, maybe even something that's becoming a genre on a small scale of this kind of work, this kind of iterative, perhaps, or critique or post-critical iterativeness. I mean, another project you could think about would be Real Flow,
yeah.
maybe, which is kind of producing paintings through the signals of the market, to say it very crudely. It's obviously maybe a bit more complicated than that. And same here, kind of narrating something, a future which is almost here, but whose logic exists in the present.
Are there any questions from the audience? Passive, active,
Shout-outs of the gallery?
audience, yeah. Could you catch it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's maybe more anecdotal than particularly theoretical, but you mentioned the Pavilion of Shamans in Venice now.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of that exhibition, in the other space, in the Giardini space, there's a whole series of images of mostly men sleeping in beds. Starts with Mladen Stalinovic, and then Franz West, and then a series of other images, also literally of beds and things like that. Photographs. And then after that, we get a room of intense activity, of labour production, actually. But it's production which is not artistic, but is migrants and visitors. So what I was wondering, I suppose, was how this idea is this idea of the dream already being commodified in the beginning of the Venice Biennale, and how do you read that if you saw it, because you talked about the Pavilion of Shamans, How do you read that relationship between the inactivity of the artist, the privilege of the artist, if you like, to be inactive, and the labour of the migrant, which seems to occur immediately after that?
I think that I haven't seen it. I have just read that they have that, and they have a pavilion of shamans, and I was kind of it just fitted so well after I've seen Documenta in Athens, and there's also a lot of shamanism there, and then of course the boys retro hype going on right now and so on. But I know about the work that you're referring to, Olafur Eliasson, who has refugees making things there, no? Which is, I think, typical for a type of kind of, in quotations, medium-less work with living people, which is very much and very openly and very strongly about exploiting the liveness of the bodies in a way that is not different from the logic of reality TV. Where it's also about having, or Vanessa Bicro performances, where it's about the models, the women in the Vanessa Bicro performances, they are supposed to collapse at one point, and that's the moment of attractivity. That's what we want to see. In reality TV, of course, it's always the person crying backstage is what we want to see, and here it is. I think it's one turn of the screw more perverted, because it's about these refugees doing meaningful things, and that's what we want to see. So we want to have that perverted kind of pleasure of having the living body going through something and enjoying this, but this time it's not about fiction, tragedy, or something like that. But it's about also like morally uplifting. And I think this is extremely a case in point for a complete lack of discourse and criticality in relation to works with living people. I mean, there are a lot of well-meant works with living people. This is a whole genre of art in the last 15 years. Some of it is called participatory, whatever it's. And there's absolutely no discourse about what's going on there, aesthetically and politically, and also what the connection of the two. So that would be there's absolutely no media reflexivity about this medium liveness in that work, and that leads, I think, subsequently to the lack or the problems with the content.
I mean, it's fine, just a comment, because it's interesting that very work is linked then to the idea of the artist dreaming, or the artist sleeping. So I don't think you can comment on it because you haven't seen it, but it's interesting that there's a link made between the privilege of the artist and the labour of the migrant or of the visitor who's also allowed to work there. But the only person who's excluded in a way from working in that room is precisely the artist who's sleeping in the room before.
Can I just interrupt? There's an artwork in between those two pieces by an artist from America, I forget her surname, but her first name is Dawn, and she invites other musicians to come. So rather than maybe pointing out a room for sleeping men, and then a man who's not present who's employing or somehow involving this spectacle of bodies, there is a woman performing really beautiful dream music in between. And I think some part of this conversation today is maybe upsetting, is that maybe these are the things I appreciate about your talk, is that you're citing examples that you advocate and the things that you want to champion and see more of. And some part of this and what we're doing is talking a lot about what we want to see, but not doing it.
Maybe to shift the conversation just a little bit. First, maybe just a brief comment about what Marina just presented, which is basically kind of a feedback issue, right? To what degree these algorithms are actually already shaping the world in advance, which is going to receive the art that it's then going to like. I mean, this video presents us as if there's already sort of a taste out there that we can somehow quantify, and we're gonna adjust the works to fit that. But of course, what algorithms are doing on the financial market is actually already shaping the market in a way in advance. And in fact, this video, which, because as an imminent critique, I can't say it can work that way, because then it should be using a voiceover, quite honestly, and a voiceover that is articulated in a very obviously, to my sense, slightly annoying, ironic tone of voice. But if you look at information aesthetics in the 1960s, they're actually already going beyond that, saying it's not only the question that the artwork has to become an algorithm, actually the critic needs to become an algorithm. So, the pronouncement, the judgment of taste needs to be computerized as such.
Well, they said that's included in the algorithm.
Well, they wanted to include the artist as way as mobilizing in the process, but not writing a program for the art critic. But why I'm saying that is because I was wondering a little bit with what you were saying, Eric, and particularly because you brought up the Dream Syndicate, and they're another version of the feedback loop. I mean, is this what the medium specificity of the non-medium is about? Is it about some kind of autopoiesis? Is it some kind of feedback configuration that you're talking about?
You first, or?
Whoever wants to.
Well, I mean, this was the first time that somebody identified the logic of singing for yourself or dreaming as a model of production. And I think it's not so much about feedback, or it's I mean, I had two examples. One was these 5 people. The other was several stories condensed by myself, by Ben Radcliffe, quoting people from the free jazz milieu of the same period, that were describing this effect not like a feedback, the effect that you were playing while you were there, but you were not playing only to yourself, but there were others involved at the same time too. They were present there too. He described this as producing a space, or a territoriality in a live act. So it is like dreaming collectively. I don't think it's exactly the same as feedback. But the media specificity side of it would be to look at live genres in general, and look at them as using something like a medium, applying the metaphor of medium to productions or practices that are not connected or not associated normally with mediacy, and take that metaphor from the dream. That is the proposal.
Well, then perhaps I think we have to begin to wrap things up. Okay.
Well, if we have time.
If we have time, I'm not sure. Yeah, do we have time for or not?
Yeah, I think one more.
Okay, one more. Oh yeah.
I was actually at the Guggenheim show where the A-Zone Futures Market thing was launched. So I just wanted to name Troy Conrad-Tieran as the curator who created the thing. Anecdote about that, it got hacked as soon as it went live by script kiddies who found an exploit which made them the dominant market partners. And Troy included them in the show, and they then handed out business cards to say, if you want us to do this for real, with real markets, we have the technology. So I just think that's a nice anecdote to go with that. I think that communized intellectual property stock might be mine, because the participants were asked to contribute ideas for it. So I'm sad to see it was down in imaginary money at that time. I also wanted to mention the work of Golden Insanity, who short the market as an artwork. And I've made money on their artwork, so I recommend it. So, just half ironically. But the point I wanted to make is this, is it actually really any worse for the artwork to be a derivative than for it to be a special manufactured product? Because the history of modernism is about artwork. Manufactured products, ooh, bad technology. The artwork, good, made by hand. And then the critique of that, because it's bullshit, right? So is it any worse for the artwork really just to be a derivative? But where the thing that's weird about it is its physical manifestation of it is the thing that makes it a special class of financial instrument. Like the primary market is for the information that circulates through art forum and art fairs and whatever, and through museums and so forth. And where the work itself is then just the derivative that stores that value. And they can stay in storage in tax-free havens in perpetuity and simply be traded between collectors, because we sort of know that's what the top end of the market now really is. But is it really worse when you look back at the 20th century and the sort of the myth of art as this sort of romantic art?
No, I think that's right. I think the thing that interested me also here in this work is the point where they say the goal of automating contemporary art is to ultimately become emancipated from it.
Yay!
So there's this idea of a kind of using the algorithm to sort of push art into a kind of qualitatively different zone by quantitative means, which then is somehow to kind of drain it of its talismanic, magical, shamanic, all terms that have come out, power. And then in a way to kind of actually make it explicit how continuous it is with the rest of kind of commodification, governance, capitalization. So to kind of algorithm it out of existence, but in a way to what end? It's the same problem as a lot of kind of like transcending art by means of art discourses, I suppose, and projects throughout modernism and beyond. It kind of needs to valorize its waste, and it needs to accumulate its waste in order to leave it behind in a way.
And then if I can just suggest an aesthetic category for it, maybe it's over-identification is the strategy, but here applied to the market rather than the state, as famously by NSK and so forth.
I mean, yeah, we see that, those over-identification strategies everywhere, right? Indeed, as you've remarked with Golden and Seneby and with Christopher Quillen Thomas and with so many others, Simon Denny, the Real Flow, and so on. I have the feeling that, here we have a kind of Lautréamont-like montage in a way, we have the sewing machine and the umbrella on an operating table, in that we have Diedrich dream work or meta dream work, and we have Marina's speculation on speculation. And we could perhaps also raise the question whether ultimately speculation in contemporary theory figures precisely as sort of the theoretical version of dream work, right? So there is this constant appeal to that which transcends mundane dialectical critique. There are appeals to the imagination. So how do these two modes function? Indeed, these two modes of labor, of let's say immaterial mediality. But perhaps we should leave it at that and continue to discuss these matters during various breaks and breakdowns and dinners and restorative drinks and what have you. Thank you very much, Marina.